All right. It's good to see you again. Hopefully, you feel the same way. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about post rotation stuff again, but this isn't going to be like specific card search or anything like that. Basically, today is going to be all about what are the most hyped or banger or whatever you want to call it decks that we're probably going to see at Worlds. There's going to be a bunch more than what I'm going to talk about. But I think that these will make up the highest percentages of decks that you'll probably see at Worlds. Yeah, so that's what this is going to be about. What are those decks? And I think there's a few that are going to be very familiar, and then there's a couple that are going to be completely new. And I think that's what I love about both rotation and this unified mindset is there's so many cards in there that seem viable day one. So let's just get right into it. So the very first deck that we're going to talk about is the super hyped Reshazard deck. Fire just has so much going for it. It's getting even more with the new set. There's no reason why you shouldn't see a decent amount of Reshazard decks out there at Worlds. Yeah, so let's think about what stays the same with this deck. Well, the core of the deck really stays the same. Your Pokemon like Reshazard, Eevee and Snorlax, Jirachi, all of those stay the same. If you're not playing the Jirachi build, if you're playing the Greens build, you still got Greens Exploration. So you're still going to have things like Volcanion and Arcanine and Turtonator. All of these different cards are going to still be in play. You still have Heat Factory, Fire Crystals, and Fiery Flint. Most of the deck stays intact, which is amazing. So the question then is, okay, well, what is changing for Worlds? What do we have to adjust for? Well, obviously, and this is going to be the same with all the decks, we're losing Guzma. That's a big one. We're also losing Nest Ball and Ultra Ball. I think losing some of those search options might hurt your Arcanines and your Volcanions, your non-GX type Pokemon. You're going to have to weave in some things like, Pokemon communications into the deck that might make it a little bit more clunky, so to speak, but I think they're still very, very valid. You can still play those cards. I don't know if a 4-line of Volcanion is going to be as valuable because it's harder to find them. So in terms of what we're going to see that's new, I think the main card that I think a lot of people are going to experiment with is Ninetales from Unbroken Bonds. If you don't have Guzma, the next best thing for a fire deck is Ninetales. It allows you to choose one of your opponent's Pokemon to switch it with their active, and that's as an ability on the bench. So it doesn't require an attack, it doesn't have to be active. Once you set up one of your Ninetales, then it can just act as a Guzma for you, for the most part. And you've seen a lot of people start playing with things like mixed herbs. You're gonna see custom catchers, 4 of them. In basically most decks that need gusting, you're gonna see 4 custom catchers. And I think you're actually gonna see switches being brought into Reshazard decks because say you use that Flare Strike, you need to get Reshazard out of the active and then back into the active to use it again somehow. So you might switch him out, put the Jirachi with the escape board on, use the Jirachi, get the Jirachi back out. So the question then is, well, what are we getting from the new sets? We're getting things like Giant Hearth, which is a great new stadium, getting things like Cherish Ball and Reset Stamp, Tag Switch, which is a great energy switch. You're getting even cards like Weak Guard Energy, I think could be interesting if you're thinking about like, okay, well, some people might be playing that new Slowpoke and Psyduck or other water builds. So this Weak Guard Energy could be really valuable. I think you might start to see some Dragonite GX and Lance Prism Stars getting weaved in as well. This is one of my favorite predictions because 270 damage is exactly as much as you need for a Reshazard. So if you're in a mirror match and you have that Dragonite GX and you can get it onto the board with Lance and you can power it up with Tag Switch and Welder, I think that could be a crazy way to grab 3 prizes, maybe the last 3 prizes that you need to win the game. So the next deck that we are going to talk about is obviously that Pikarom deck, and specifically a Pikarom and then a Choo-Choo or Raichu tag team. So both of those inside of a Pikarom deck. So in terms of the core of the deck, again, most of it stays the same. Your Pokemon like Pikarom, Zeraora GX, you got Zapdos and Dedenne, Tapu Koko Prism Star, you've got your E-Powers and your Thunder Mountains and your Volkners. all of that stays the same. So really, like, what makes this deck a real threat is all still there, which is great. In terms of what you're losing Tapu Lele. Everyone is, so it'll be a little annoying to find some of those Volkners maybe. Outside of that, you're also losing that Tapu Koko GX. I actually think, for me, this is a big loss for this deck. That was the card that you need to take down a Pikarom in a mirror match, a Reshizard, that big explosive one-turn, tag team KO. You don't have that with this deck anymore. In terms of how you get there, I think Alolan Raichu and Raichu's Tag Team GX does a decent amount of damage if you can get enough energy on it. Maybe enough to do what you need, and all the E-powers definitely help. But that Tapu Koko GX, I think, saved a lot of people's butts, including mine, in some games. So what are we going to see that's new in these decks, right? You got custom catchers again. I think you're going to see even more switches added into these decks with the loss of Guzma and Escape Rope. I think you're going to see Electromagnetic Charger, maybe, to get those Electro powers back, because, you don't have that Choice Band anymore. You don't have Tapu Koko. And I actually think you're going to start to see some stealthy hoods weave their way into not just this deck, but a bunch of decks to get around all of these new Pokemon that have abilities that can really block you. So that's, I think, what we might see adding in that exists. In terms of what we are getting, same things, Cherish Balls, Reset Stamps, Tag Switch, but we are also getting Stadium Nav, which is a perfect card for finding your Thunder Mountain exactly when you need it. So Stadium Nav as a 1 or a 2-op in these decks, I think, is going to be a standard. Yeah. And in terms of its Achilles heels, I think potential fighting decks with Martial Arts Dojo and Black Belt, etc., could be a problem. I think that's why those Mewtwo and Mew GXs could be useful when you're facing those types of decks. Weak Guard Energies could help. And then again, Fairy decks with that Lightning, Charm. Even Fairy decks with things like Ability Charm, because you have a few Pokemon with abilities. That could be a real problem for this matchup. So the third deck we are going to talk about, and I think we're going to see a lot of, is a Mew Mew Toolbox deck. Now, obviously, Mewtwo's ability from the new set. It lets you use any attack from other GX Pokemon if they're on your bench or in your discard pile. It doesn't matter what kind of attack. GX attack. You can only use, obviously, one GX a game. But you can use these attacks, which is crazy. So you can basically run a 4 off of Mewtwo and Mew GX, and then just find and discard all of the other Pokemon that you need for their different attacks for situational moments in the game. You need to discard Pokemon in order to make this deck really work, or get some of those Pokemon onto your bench. You don't want too many of them on your bench, but a couple could be useful. But yeah, that I think is the main crux of this deck, is if you're not getting them into the discard pile, this deck doesn't do anything for you. Finding and using this weird variety of energy could be a bit awkward. You have to run a variety of them, which means you got to run things like Viridian Forest to find exactly what you need when you need it. Accelerating energy for certain attacks that you need could be weird. And then once you use the energies, depending on the attacks that you're using, you don't want to just keep loading up Mewtwo and Mew with different energies in case it dies, and then all of your energies go to the discard and it's hard to get them back. I think the key cards for this deck are really the tag team. I think Reshizard, Dragonite GX, Latios GX, Jirachi GX. Those are all those core Pokemon you need. And then everything else is kind of up to you. What deck do you want to build? What do you want to tech against? I think Viridian Forest, Cherish Balls, Pokemon Communicators, Denes. I think Naganadel could be really interesting for these builds to help you get whatever kind of energy you need onto the field. Welder is really powerful, especially if you're running a Reshizard in this deck. Power Plant is going to completely shut a Mewtwo and Mew GX down. So you need to have a decent number of stadiums to combat that. Without that, a couple of Power Plants on the field during a game, and you're just locked out entirely. And then a Keldeo GX and a Latios GX on the other side of the field could be problematic because, that Keldeo, if all you're running is Mewtwo and Mew, you can't do anything, right? So I think that's why this deck could really benefit from adding in a couple of non-GX type Pokemon. I think, honestly, every deck is going to need to run a couple of non-GX Pokemon just in case that Keldeo comes around. Unless you have a good way to gust it out of the active, that Keldeo could be a game ender for so many decks out there. So that's 3 of them. What's the 4th that we are gonna be really hyped about for Worlds? And that deck is going to be what we're calling the Dark Box deck. That deck is gonna feature a bunch of new Pokemon from Unified Minds, Darkness type Pokemon. And those Pokemon are going to be the Weavile GX, the Tyranitar Tag Team GX, and the Umbreon Tag Team GX. And the benefit here is that Darkness is getting a lot of love in the new set. So the idea behind this deck really is that you can do big attacks, you can move your energy around freely with the Weavile GX, and you can move your Pokemon around freely with Night City, the stadium card. So between free energy movement and free retreat with 2 cards, that really allows you to have massive flexibility in the game of like, okay, choosing what you want to do. You're not limited to your hand necessarily, which is great. And then finally, the other big aspect of this is, a couple of these cards allow you to take extra prizes when you KO a Pokemon. And that already puts you ahead in the prize game. That's a big plus of this deck as well. There's a lot of moving pieces. That's, I think, one of its Achilles heels, is that all of the moving pieces needing to be in place for this deck to really work. The Darkness energy movement, the Night City on the board, etc. Getting a stage 1 set up and a couple of other Pokemon on your bench all set up. That could be challenging for this deck, this interdependency. And then again, theme of the day, Keldeo and Latios GX are going to be really, I think, powerful in the new meta because so many GXs are going to be the key of these decks. So that's, I think, why you do need to run that Darkrai Prism star card, maybe a couple of other cards. I looked at things like Guzzlord, etc. So you have a non-GX Pokemon that you can move energy onto, switch them out for free, and do some damage with. Obviously, that's going to be, I think, critical to most decks moving forward. And then finally, we are going to talk about the last most hyped deck for Worlds, and I think that's going to be the Malamar, the Ultra Mali deck, as I think people are calling it, the Ultra Necrozma Malamar deck. This deck is actually not very new. I don't think a lot changes with this deck. It's just a great deck today, and it will be a great deck moving forward. The core basically all stays the same: Necrozma, Malamar, Giratina, the tag team of Gengar and Mimikyu if you want to play that, Mysterious Treasures, Beast Energies, etc. All of these are still there and available for you. I think the main difference here is that you're losing Rescue Stretcher as well, which for a Malamar reliant deck could be a challenge. In terms of how you combat that, there's a few cards. I think things like Brock's Grit, I believe that allows you to pull Pokemon from the discard pile and put them into your deck. That could be a critical card if your opponent knows that you're running this deck and starts going after those Malamars. I think, finding those Brock's Grits and using those to get Malamar back onto your bench is critical. I think the real benefit of this deck as a whole is that it is not a tag team GX focused deck. So you have a prize advantage in the Pokemon that you're playing versus your opponent. I think that is a major selling point for this deck going into Worlds as well. So those are the 5 decks that I've been hearing the most about, that I've been watching other videos. And I just want to give a shout out. This was not at all from my mind. I just wanted to put this video together because I think sort of a compilation of the best decks is really useful for people. But shout out to Tablemon Pablo, shout out to Omnipoke, shout out to Zapdos TCG. I think those 3 channels, and then Tricky Jim as well. Those 4 channels are all doing great videos, deep dives into these decks. So if you want more details on any of these decks or even other decks that they think are going to be good, definitely check their channels out. They're the ones who did the research here. I just sort of put things together. I'll link them in the comments as well. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what your favorite decks going into Worlds you think are. And definitely, if you like this, feel free to subscribe. Check out some of my other videos for post rotation. And I will see y'all on the flippity flop.